What up, Pittsburgh Steel fans? Matty P here with another episode of Steelers Touching Under. We are talking about the 5 things to note and understand from Mike Tomlin's press conference. Let's get straight into it. So, Mike Tomlin's weekly press conference on a Tuesday, it's well covered out there on YouTube. It's well covered out there on social media. It's well covered out there on the NFL and Steelers media. But everyone just covers exactly what he says. I listened to this press conference twice now, and I want to talk about 5 things that he said but didn't say explicitly in this interview. So that's what's different. Let's crack into number 1. He talked about, in opening up the press conference, he talked about the fact that the Steelers elected to receive off the kickoff and wanted to start that way and wanted to start with momentum. Now, what that is about is giving the Steelers extra possessions. We've talked about all season, you've heard it probably in a lot of places around the Steelers, and you've seen it on the field. Still struggling to take advantage of their possessions. The Steelers taking a long time to get going. That feeds into that whole Kenny Pickett fourth quarter narrative. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. But the Steelers offense just takes time to get going. And so giving them an extra possession from the get-go is really important because this team's averaging a couple of turnovers a game. Immediately, the more possessions you can give them, the faster you can get them into a rhythm, the more likelihood that this offense is going to hum and fire. And it did. So point number 1 there, as I say, is the fact that possessions are everything to this team, and they understand that. And that's a really good thing because in one of the keys to victory that I mentioned on one of our shows last week, I said the Steelers need more possessions. So the fact they did that is fantastic. Point number 2, it came up a couple of times in the press conference in different elements, from a question that a journalist asked where he talked about Siamalu saying the run game was vital to the victory. Tomlin talked about the run game being vital to victory. Some people, there was a couple of questions around the division of labor between Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. And also Mike Tomlin talked about them taking the fact that they had a good run game, the Steelers had a good run game through those two blokes, meant that they could minimize the run game of Derrick Henry. That was literally one of the key points we made on this channel before the game, and the pre-game show that Mark and I did. That was a key point I made about how the Steelers would find victory. It's very hard, as I always say, for the opposition to score points when you have the ball, unless you make a mistake. We saw that on the field where the Steelers had over 160 yards rushing versus just 70 yards rushing the week before against the Jacksonville Jaguars. That's point number 2 there, is that this run game is all about holding possession, sucking away time, and having the best defense. One of your best defensive options is to play good offense. Point number 3, people asked about the difference between Kenny Pickett, the quarters 1 to 3, and Kenny Pickett fourth quarter. Tomlin doesn't care. Now, yeah, you might say, yeah, I kind of got that feeling from watching the press conference or from what someone said in debriefing on the press conference. But what Mike Tomlin is really saying in that is Kenny Pickett needs time. Kenny Pickett is already a winner. We know that Kenny Pickett has great intangibles. Mark Kaboly actually had an article on this in Athletic where he still rubbished Kenny Pickett's tangibles, but said there's a time your tangibles catch up with your intangibles, even if your intangibles are great. Get a bit confusing with the word tangible there. But what Mike Tomlin is saying is give Kenny Pickett time. Kenny Pickett is already a winner. Kenny Pickett can play fourth quarter football. And it's exactly, again, a narrative we've been seeing on this channel for weeks now. Kenny Pickett has played less than 20 games. Less than 20 games. Stop defining him with the characteristics and the lens of people that have played a lot more than that. It's especially with how much evolution this Steelers offense and team and the quality on this team has taken, and with how many first round and second round and third round rookies they have in the last 3 or 4 years that are on this team. Yes, they've got a high draft pedigree, but actually they need experience. Experience counts. The problem here is the level of experience. And yes, Kenny Pickett is missing some open throws right now. Yes, Kenny Pickett is throwing it high on some throws as well. But that's the evolution of a quarterback. And again, Kenny Pickett's career average is a percentage for completions is like 62%. Do you know Big Ben's? It's 64.7%. So Kenny Pickett, yes, it needs to get better, but it's not like Kenny Pickett is a 40% improvement or a 30% improvement on what he's doing today. He needs like a 20% more efficiency on raw numbers, minimum under that. So anyway, back to Tomlin's press conference, Kenny Pickett is the guy. Just give him more time. Point number 4. Broderick Jones. Mike Tomlin was quite strategic, I felt, in the way he answered this. He didn't fully commit to Broderick Jones being a starter for the rest of the season. He inferred that that should be the case. Most people now think that should be the case. I felt like that since the season started. But what he did was he basically inferred that would be the case. And obviously it'll depend on injury as well to Moore or himself. But he didn't guarantee it. So he said, I want to see things from this week. So Broderick Jones still has to continue to prove himself. That is exactly the right messaging. The media can crucify Mike Tomlin on this all they want. Rake him over the hot coals about being non-committal. That's not what it's about. It's about inspiring Broderick Jones to realize one game doesn't give you that starting role on its own. You need to do more than just one game. You need to continue to prove yourself. And that's exactly what we want Mike Tomlin to do with a young player with the talent of Broderick Jones, especially a kid that had like 21 starts in college. And we're talking about a 5-year starter. So any experience is really important for him to get. He's got to value that. He's got to cherish that and want the role. You can't just hand it to him on a silver platter. Which is a good segue into point number 5 around Joey Porter Jr. because there's been this whole narrative, were they going to start him? Was he going to get the pedigree of his father? They've taken a while to use him, but he's so efficient. Mike Tomlin talked about this because he said, everyone talked about how well Joey Porter covered DeAndre Hopkins. Again, in pre-game show, we said on this channel, I would just stick, let's just said it 4 or 5 hours before the game. I literally would just stick Joey Porter Jr. on DeAndre Hopkins and just play man defense like that and just see how it goes. So see that happen in the game tells me that there's a reason why we've got this channel. But going back to Joey Porter and what was said is that a lot of questions were asked about how he was set on DeAndre Hopkins and he's become shut down and why is it that he's got more plays. And Tomlin talked about the impact of him on the field and what that allowed him to do elsewhere, which if you think wider with a wider lens, how the injury of Minkah Fitzpatrick comes into play, this is really important. He didn't guarantee Joey Porter, and he talked about also starts being similar to wide receivers. He didn't guarantee Joey Porter would start every game the rest of the season. He didn't guarantee Joey Porter's role in the defense either. So what you need to take away from the way he talked about this and the way he's been used, Joey Porter's snaps and presence in a game is going to be dependent on 2 things: the Steelers personnel and the opposition's personnel. And it's more probably going to be dictated unless there's a serious run of injuries in the defensive backfield, and particularly also with the addition of Darius Rush, he's going to get opportunities. It's going to be more dictated about the opposition's personnel, whether that's in the run game and where they can be used as a threat. So, for instance, if the Steelers, were to go up against, Kamara types, Saquon Barkley types, McCaffrey types, etc., you've got to think about how your defensive back and sub packages are working and where that role is, right? So yeah, Joey Porter Jr.'s snaps for the season will be dependent on the personnel he plays. Now that, in most sense, he's probably going to play a lot more snaps than what he did to start the season. The Steelers played a lot more man last year and have played that this year versus what they had previous years. He is a good press corner. He's definitely developing and adjusting to the league. But getting lost in the weeds of, is Joey Porter the starter this week? Why isn't he the starter that week? That's not what it's about. You've got to look at the matchups, how they can utilize him and give him that experience and use the best of his talents. He isn't that, in the draft, the big knock on him, why I didn't have him as a first round or a top 20 pick in the league, pick in the draft, was the fact that he was struggled in zone. He skipped drills at the combine related to zone. That doesn't mean he can never play zone, but you're not going to go and overly put him in those situations, particularly when he's so much better at press coverage and man coverage than some of the other Steelers defensive backs. So that's one key thing to note. Look, there are many other things we could have shared in this video, but I wanted fans to have a sense of just if you take away anything this week from these press conferences, from any of the deciphering and decoding and, summaries of these press conferences on social media and YouTube and any other media sources, you're going to get much of the same stuff. I'll listen to 3 different breakdowns of the press conferences. You get much of the same stuff. But I like to go behind the messaging and think about what's actually being said. And that's why I wanted to do this show and give this out to you. Because if you read between the lines, and that can be hard because Mike Tomlin doesn't like to give the media much, and the media don't ask him questions that most fans want to hear. There is some really interesting trends. And the other thing I take note about all of this, We talked about Joe Porter Jr. We talked about Broderick Jones. We talked about a young Jalen Warren in the run game. We talked about Kenny Pickett. And we also talked about the offense getting started. What's the common trait? Youth, development of experience, getting humming, getting comfortable on the field. If the Steelers can improve in that area, which has a whole host of stats and schemes that play into that, if they can get better in that area, this team should be able to win at least another 5 or 6 games and make it into the playoffs. And who knows, if they win enough games and they win enough of the division games, that could actually get them the division as well. But we'll see that from this week onwards. We'll see them take on a Green Bay Packers team coming off a win. We'll have more content coming out on Steelers Touchdown Under. So as always, go Steelers.